Pastor Matthew had warned me about that happening, but I decided not to listen. I just wanted to start this morning off by saying how great it is to see Ellen out again this morning. It's great to have you here. Glad to see you walking on your own. That's great. So praise God for that. So we've been tracking for the past 3 weeks on the word redemption. And we're trying to rediscover what this word means because it's become blurred over time and our frequent use of it and not really knowing what it means. And we've been looking at stories specifically from the Old Testament, and we first started with Abraham and Lot, and we learned that redemption was a thing that came from their culture, and that it was the responsibility of the male leader of every household to act out in redemption for their family. And in the same way, we've learned that Jesus stops at nothing to bring us back to him. And then last week, through the story of Judah and Tamar, we learned that redemption is messy. But Jesus isn't afraid of plunging into our mess in order to redeem us. And today we're going to look and see how our faith matters when it comes to our redemption. I want to ask you a couple questions. Have you ever been in a situation where you couldn't predict what was going to happen, and in that moment you had to make a decision, but you didn't just have to make a decision, you had to have faith in your decision and trust what you had decided to do? See, sometimes it's easy for us to have faith in things, especially when they're things we've experienced and walked through before. Kind of like how we have faith that the sun's going to rise tomorrow morning, or that our vehicle is going to get us from our house to work or to the grocery store and back, for the most part. And then we're able to have faith in these things because we've seen them and we've experienced them, right? But what about the things that we don't see? How can we have faith in them? Like how we have faith that there's air for us to breathe or gravity that's going to hold us in place. It's hard to explain those things. So how can we explain to people that we have faith that God's going to redeem us from our situations? And today, through the story of Ruth and Boaz, we're going to see how our faith matters when it comes to our redemption. We have a part in the story. Now, I want to start with our story this morning, and we're going to be kind of jumping all over the book of Ruth. But the story actually starts with Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi. Now, Naomi was married to Elimelech, and they had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they had to move away from Israel because of a famine. And during their time away, Elimelech died, and Naomi became a widow. But at least she still had her 2 sons to take care of her, right? But later on, these 2 sons, they married 2 women from Moab, and they were Orpah and Ruth. But then 10 years later after that, those sons die, so now Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-laws are left as widows. Now, Naomi's heard that the famine in Israel is finally ended, so she's decided that she's going to go back and hope that someone from her family in Bethlehem will take her back in. But this next part's important to remember. So we've been learning over the past couple of weeks how family life worked in ancient Israel, right? So I want you to keep that in mind while I read Ruth chapter 1. I'm going to start at verse 8, and we're going to go through to verse 13. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. "No," they said, we want to go with you and your people." But Naomi replied, "Why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? Of course not, my daughters. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. See, Naomi tells her daughters-in-law to return back to their parents' homes. She has nothing left for them. Her husband's dead, her sons are dead, and we've learned that in their culture, women found their identity from their husbands and their families. It's not like us who could just go and get a job and live on our own like a lot of independent women do in our society today. It would have taken a miracle for Naomi to find another husband. It would have taken a second miracle for her to have a child, and then a third miracle for that child to even be a son. And then they would have to wait 20 years for that child to grow up. Naomi didn't want her daughters-in-law to throw away their futures. But then we read the famous passage that is often recorded in wedding ceremonies to couples back and forth, and it's in Ruth 1:16-17. And here we see how Ruth takes a leap of faith and decides to stay with Naomi. It says, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us." See, Ruth's situation was unclear, and it didn't make sense what was happening, and she couldn't tell what was going to happen. But she did have an option. She could have gone back to her parents. Things probably would have been easier for her. She would have been cared for, and she would have had a higher chance of finding another husband. But Ruth has faith in God, and she has faith that God is going to provide for her and redeem her from this situation. She wants to also be faithful to her previous husband and his name. So she steps out in faith. So then Ruth and Naomi, they make their trip back to Bethlehem. And then the text says that they had to scavenge across the fields for food. You might be wondering why they had to do that. Why couldn't they just go to the store and buy some food or ask someone to give some to them? In order to understand that, I want to read Deuteronomy 24, verses 19-21. "When you are harvesting your crops and forget to bring in a bundle of grain from your field, don't go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigners, orphans, and widows. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all you do. When you beat the olives from your olive trees, don't go over the boughs twice. Leave the remaining olives for the foreigners, orphans, and widows. When you gather grapes in your vineyard, don't glean the vines after they are picked. Leave the remaining grapes for the foreigners, orphans, and widows." This was a system that God had set in place, and this system was meant to take care of those who had fallen to the sides and the margins of society. See, this law, in a way, acted kind of like our food banks that we have today, and how people in our community who fall upon hard times can just come and get what they need. And then it's during this time when Ruth is in the field picking some food for her and her mother-in-law, and then she meets the owner of the field, who happens to be Boaz. And then Ruth comes back, tells Naomi about her day, and Naomi tells her that Boaz is actually a relative of theirs, and that he could restore their family. So Naomi then helps Ruth make up a plan to confront Boaz and persuade him to reclaim their family's land and to even marry her, possibly. Now, this all takes place in chapter 3 in the scene of the threshing floor. You're probably familiar of it. So at this point, Boaz, he's had his food and his fill of drink, and he's gone to sleep at this point. And then Ruth sneaks in and wakes him up. I'm going to read what happens next in verses 9-13. "And he said, 'Who are you?' Ruth said, 'I am your maiden. Take me under your protecting wing. You're my close relative, in the circle of covenant redeemers. You do have the right to marry me." He said, "God bless you, my dear daughter. What a splendid expression of love. And when you could have had your pick of any of the young men around. And now, my dear daughter, don't you worry about a thing. I'll do all you could want or ask. Everybody in town knows what a courageous woman you are, a real prize. You're right. I am a close relative to you, but there is one even closer than I. So stay the rest of the night, and in the morning, if he wants to exercise his customary rights and responsibilities as the closest covenant redeemer, he will have his chance. But if he isn't interested, as God lives, I'll do it. Now go back to sleep until morning." See, what Ruth does here goes totally against the cultural norms. Women in that time did not pursue men, and they especially didn't go under the cover of night or wake them up when they're sleeping. That was a big no-no. But see, Ruth wasn't worried about any of that. She was worried about redeeming her family, and she knew that she could do that through Boaz. She had faith that God would provide for her and make a way to redeem her family. She was able to have faith because she knew that God had been faithful in the past. We read that in the provisions that he had provided for her in the fields. The way she saw it, she had nothing to lose here. And Boaz, we read that he recognized her faith and that he was moved by it. Not only did he say that he would buy back their family's land and take them in, but he also said that he would marry her and restore her previous husband's family. So the next day, Boaz, he goes into the town and he finds this other relative and tells him about the situation. At first, the relative says, "Yeah, I'll buy back the land." But then when he finds out that one of the conditions is Ruth and her mother and the restoring of their family, he says that he can't because he doesn't want to put his own family on the line and risk them. He wants the land, but not the extra mouths to feed. So he tells Boaz that he can redeem them if he wants. He gives them his blessing. So then Boaz, he collects the townspeople and he uses them as his witnesses, and he says to them that he's going to marry Ruth and that their first child will continue Mahlon's line. And then the townspeople pray a blessing over Ruth and Boaz. Because of their faithfulness, they pray that they would grow up and have a strong family, and they even reference her to the people from last week's story, Judah and Tamar. And then the story ends with Ruth having a son, and then we read that through that son and through Ruth's line, the future king of Israel, David, is born. See, Ruth had to go through a very difficult situation, and she could have took the easy way out. She could have returned to her parents. She could have found another husband. But she felt that God was asking her to have faith and to stay. To have faith that he would make a way to redeem her. She stepped out in faith, and God provided for her along the way. And eventually Boaz comes into the picture, and he uses him to redeem them and restore them to a place of honor again in their society. Our faith matters. God can and does redeem us, but we need to have faith that he will. When I think of the New Testament, I can think of many people who had courageous faith, and I often think of Paul, but one that comes to mind before Paul is the story of the centurion in Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 to 13. I'm going to read that for us right now. When Jesus had returned to Capernaum, a Roman officer came and pleaded with him, "Lord, my young servant lies in bed, paralyzed and in terrible pain." And Jesus said, "I will come and heal him." But the officer said, "Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come into my house. Just say the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. I know this because I am under authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go, and they go. Come, and they come. And to my slaves, if I say do this, they do it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. And turning to those who were following him, he said, "I tell you the truth. I haven't seen faith like this in all Israel. And I tell you this, that many Gentiles will come from all over the world, from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. But many Israelites, for whom the kingdom was prepared, will be thrown into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And then Jesus turned to the Roman officer and said, "Go back home. Because you believed, it has happened." And that young servant was healed within the same hour. See, in their society, all the Jewish people would have seen that this centurion, this Gentile, he wasn't somebody that would be expected to have faith. And this story, it's unique. And there's only a few instances where Jesus heals someone from a distance, and this is one of them. The centurion stopped Jesus from entering the presence of the sick servant, and he declared that he believed Jesus had enough authority and power to heal him from a distance just by saying the word. I wish that I had faith like that. Now, I want to share a little bit of my story and where I've had to step out in faith. Now, back in 2018, I was living on my own, had my own home, and I was working in a stair company, and I was getting groomed to take over the business, and everything was set that way. But then I felt God calling me to ministry, and I remember praying and hearing him say, like, "Do you trust me? Can you take and leave everything you have right now and just come and follow me?" And then I joined the Flow program. I met Wes. We had a good time that summer. And through that, I ended up going back to school. I sold my house, quit my job, went back to school full time. And I'm not going to say it was easy. There was a lot of tough times. And there was a lot of times I didn't know how I was going to make the next payment for the next semester. But God always made a way, and he provided in that. And then fast forward 2 years into my education, I was at my last church, Springvale, and Rosanna and I felt God calling us to leave there. He didn't say to what. He just said, "Just leave, and then I'll provide for you, and we'll figure it out together." So we stepped out in faith, not knowing where we would be going. And then 6 months later, we found you guys here at Six Line and applied for the interview, not knowing that would happen, stepping out in faith. See, our faith matters to us. It matters to God, and it matters in our redemption. See, from today's stories, we learn that we need to have faith in what God can do in our lives. We need to have faith that Jesus is going to pull through for us, and we can trust that because we know that he's been faithful in the past. We need to remember our past experiences. See, we've been trying to rediscover what the word redemption really means. And we know that Jesus is going to stop at nothing in his pursuit for us, and he's going to bring us back to him. And we've learned that he's going to plunge into our mess and bring us out of that. He's not afraid of the mess. And based off of those truths, we can have faith like Ruth, like the centurion. We can have faith that Jesus is going to redeem us. I want to close this morning with a question. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up now. We're going to pray as well. But this question that I want you guys to ponder today and throughout the week is, where is God asking you to step out in faith? Let's pray together this morning. Father, I thank you for your son Jesus and what he did on the cross. Father, I pray that we would have courage like Ruth and other strong characters in the Bible that we read about, that we could take and leave everything, all the comforts we have, and just follow you and trust what you have for us. that we would have faith to step out and fully lean into you. We know it's not easy, but I just pray that we would have that courage. Again, we thank you and we love you. In your name, amen.